This little hallway is just
Evidently, they can't control it,
It's
which is
better
really
than being
irritating.
hot. Yesterday, Senate Trans was like, the thermostat said 446. I think it was like broken, but I'm like, it feels like.
Okay, we are live again, and we are going to turn to our two resolutions that we're hoping to vote out and finish anyway. And so we're waiting for we have one of our two Ledge Council members here, and we have our trade director. So we are going to walk through the new language, which the committee asked for last week. And we have a new draft. Are we all set? We have it.
I do, yes.
You want to share your screen, or you
I was
want,
waiting for,
I'm either way, we have it in front of us, but maybe for the people who are watching, we could share the screen.
okay, well, good morning, Rick Sable, Office of Legislative Counsel. This is draft 1.1 of a committee strike all amendment to Senate Resolution 11, the Canada resolution. I see Michael coming in.
SR 11.
SR 11.
Okay, that's okay.
SR 11.
Great.
So the changes are in bold. And we'll start with the first page, line 16. Adding the word family. And here's Michael
Great.
Turner. All right, Michael.
Terrific.
I'm walking through. If you want to take over, yeah, I will defer. I'm going to leave my screen up so you all can see the.
Why doesn't Michael pull up a chair that next
Yeah.
to you so that we can both work together?
Thank you, Senator.
Where were you up to?
Just started.
Okay.
That's the word family on page 1.
Oh, that's the first. Good morning for the
Good
record.
morning.
Michael Chernick, legislative council. I'm now in the third time in the last 15 minutes. Oh, I hadn't realized you want me to do both Taiwan and Canada, but we're obviously starting with Canada.
Yes.
So there we go. What I had done is based upon the meeting on Friday, a phone conversation with Tim yesterday. Materials Tim sent me, I did some revisions.
Great.
I purposely asked Megan not to put this on the web. This has not been edited. It's with an assumption that you're going to be making any number of changes to this. It was just my giving you language for right now so you can start. We have to start somewhere.
Yeah.
And so that's what this does. And I intentionally bolded everything that's new so you know exactly what I did.
Right.
And so for the first very opening, the title of the first clause stays exactly the same. As Rick said, the second clause, based upon what you asked me, I added the word family in. And that's the only change on page 1. Everything else is verbatim what you saw on Friday. Page 2.
And just in terms of family, I think just grammatically it works. Familial would work better than family, but
I can make it, my spell checker this morning was not happy with familial. Famila,
IAL.
FAMILIAL. Familial. Okay.
IAL.
I have that right, and I noted that in pen.
Okay, great.
Now, going to page 2.
can we do page by page? Did you all have a big conversation about
Yeah,
saying
we did.
Quebecers?
Quick walk.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know why it says Quebecers.
Because Quebecois sometimes can have sometimes has very definite, if you're writing this in English and not in French, when you speak about Quebecois, it's also referring to French Francophiles as opposed to all Quebecers, and Quebecers include both Anglophiles and Francophiles. And that was something that a Quebecois and Quebecer are. Quebecois means somebody who's French Canadian by background. There are tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of folks who live in Quebec who are not Quebecois, who are Quebecers by residency, but where they vote, etc. Politically, there are members of parliament from Quebec who are not Quebecois.
So what
Quebecers.
I think this whole section is way too specific unnecessarily. It highlights Montreal, Quebec City,
Right, we can
Quebecers.
put, if you want to
I
pull
would-
it entirely, I
Yeah,
can put
I
a
mean,
question mark too. Do you want me to pull the clause? I can.
Well, no, I think you actually make a good case for Quebecers as opposed to Quebecois.
I can go back over if you want to pull the clause. Everything as I was told.
But we did, we
Right.
spent a bit of time. Should we go over the changes that you did
Yeah, and
incorporate?
then I
that we
can
asked
remember
for
everything
first,
here is
and then-
digital.
I think that's a faux pas. I think trying to get too specific in this is a faux pas, honestly.
Okay, well, you can, do whatever you like. Everything's digital and I can move things around, erase, add. The beauty of it being on a computer, I can do anything you like with it.
Well, why don't we finish with what the
Right,
changes
sure.
that we made?
Exactly, that is what I just wrote down.
Okay, so the top of page 2, I noted the clause with respect to governance Scott's the same, but it's in a slightly different place because that seemed to be where it belonged among the clauses. But the clause itself is the same. Now, the next clause is entirely new. Beyond this, and based upon the conversations and what I heard on Friday. Beyond these periodic gubernatorial forays on a more continuous basis, comma, the important, again, don't worry about commas and semis because the editors will have a day with it afterwards. The importance of this relationship is epitomized in the Agency of Community Development's maintenance of its trade office in Canada to work continuously with federal, provincial, and local officials and the private sector to maximize opportunities for a vibrant two-way trading relationship between Vermont and our northern neighbor. That's new. Then the next 2 clauses are the same. The next 3 clauses are the same. You go to page 3 in the middle, and now we go through a series of new clauses, about 6 or 7 new clauses, based upon what I heard Friday. Whereas tariffs can serve a role in fostering domestic markets and protecting American workers from drastically lower wages abroad than paid in the United States. And whereas conversely, the limitation of tariffs and constructively drafted free trade provisions can spark investment and mutual economic benefit between nations, comma, especially when the nations involved are similarly higher wage and economically developed, such as are the United States and Canada. And whereas the trading history between the United States and Canada reflects both the negative consequences of excessive tariffs and the benefits of increased free trade with reasonable protective provisions. And whereas the 50% tariffs imposed on Canadian imports under the McKinley Tariff of 1890 resulted in a significant Canadian turn to Great Britain for trading opportunities, disadvantaging American economic interests. And I have material on that.
Wait,
Whereas, okay.
No.
Yeah, now we're on page 4.
yeah,
Okay, on the top of page 4, Senator.
right?
Whereas conversely, and that probably means the comment, the currently enforced United States, Canada, Mexico Agreement, USMCA is, I think I had that word, United States, Canada, Mexico, United States,
It's
Mexico. Okay, it is right, yeah. It's broadly drafted, covering many aspects of the North American continental economic relationship, seeks to maximize the duty-free trading relationship between the United States and Canada on many goods and services, while requiring continental content minimums on designated products and excluding others that remain topics of political disagreement between the 2 countries. And I was thinking, as I chatted with Tim, about dairy, software, or maple syrup on occasion.
Yeah.
Whereas at present, the Canadian goods and services covered under the USMCA remain exempted from the 10% universal base tariff that has been imposed on all goods being imported to the United States. However, the United States has imposed a 25% tariff on imports of Canadian steel and aluminum, automotive parts, and 10% on energy, the last impacting Vermonters most immediately, given the long-standing Vermont-Quebec energy relationship. And that list, by the way, I went over with Tim yesterday afternoon. If he tells me I'm wrong, I'll change it. Whereas a problematic aspect of the current tariff crisis between the 2 nations is the unpredictability, as the historic and stabilizing role of congressional involvement in the tariff design and imposition process has been replaced with executive orders that establish arbitrary rates and are subject to sudden change. Now, the next clause begins the same, but I threw back in a line that I had earlier, and you can decide what you want to do with it as a backstop measure, but it is preferable that the need for that task force be as minimal as possible. And then the first 2 results remain exactly the same, and the last one exactly as you saw on Friday. But the third is new based upon what I was told on Friday, that the Senate of the state of Vermont urges the U.S. Congress to reassert the legislative branch's historic role in the crafting of international trade policy, including the imposition of tariffs. And those are all my changes.
This is a lot longer than I think.
I know.
we had
I
expected,
know it was a lot
or
longer, but
that we had actually discussed.
right,
So-
it's longer, Senator, because
And there's a lot of supporting the tariffs, the early, I mean, I don't think we need to do the whole history of tariffs. I mean, unless somebody.
I also heard from Senator Weeks on Friday. I was trying to respond to some of his comments as well.
No, I don't think you're, so I'm not in favor of the resolution from the get-go. I don't understand tariffs well enough, so I didn't inject any thoughts into.
That's where the 1890s language came from. We were coming, but
Yeah.
I put it in knowing, Senator, that it was now way longer, but what I decided to do was to graft in everything I heard on Friday, and then you can start eliminating.
Okay, great.
That was my thought.
That was my question. If these three paragraphs got really verbose somewhat in order to address concerns, valid concerns, I've heard from those that didn't sign on to this resolution. But if that's not necessarily the case, and this doesn't necessarily sort of address some of the valid uses of tariffs, I think concision is more valuable than.
Fine, so we would start cutting from where?
Well, let's just all discuss it first.
Read family in,
Familial.
familial, and then I go to the next page.
I really,
Wait a minute, and just one sec, Kate, and then we'll go to Kim. Kim, your additions, what were your, I mean,
I'm, looking through this, the only comment I had looking at this was the part on the energy, and it kind of mentions Vermont, Quebec, and it's actually Vermont, Canada. We receive a lot of our fuel from New Brunswick and St. John, so
right.
I don't know if it needs to be specific to Quebec.
Okay.
is what I'm
So
Okay, I've already changed that in my,
Okay,
I've already
can we
scribbled that in, should we keep it?
Then let's just, instead of jumping all over, let's go page by page, because I know
Yeah.
Paige had some thoughts on page
can
one.
we go to biggest picture? That I have the same concerns as Senator Weeks. I'm sorry I wasn't here for this on Friday, but I thought the resolution was the first part of the statement, warm relations with Canada. But I think it's unwise without more significant testimony to say we urge President Trump to remove all tariffs. We're out of our lane. I think we're out of our lane.
Really, I don't. I think that's, well, I mean, we can, I would like to repeal the additional tariffs that he is talking, that he is.
But if we're not
proposing.
careful, we don't look particularly savvy. I don't know what to say on how trade works.
Amateurish.
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
And that's,
Because, we have to take into account what's in the
NAFTA.
trade agreement that we
Yeah,
have right now.
yeah.
well, and that is what we're relying on him for as well. So that, who originally drafted? Wait, one at a time.
So I just wanted to say that with respect to that, this is a point. I noted that they were in effect on that were not in effect on January 20. So it's not referring to anything that wasn't in effect on January 20.
So some are good and some are bad.
It says nothing about the USC. It just says what happened since January 20.
Right.
That's January 20.
Can you, where's the January
It's
20?
the under,
Right in there.
Whereas,
it's on the screen as well.
Has
And then the results.
no comments about changing the USMCA.
okay,
This is a factual piece.
so I just don't know the history of this resolution.
I can, if you like, I'm happy to give you in a nutshell the history in about 4 sentences, very shortly and short and
Yeah.
concise. This started in the latter part of February, when Representative Page came to me. And he asked me to do, what? Page from Newport City. Woody Page from.
Woody Page.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay, I didn't know where that person.
Okay, yeah, anyway, and he came to me and he asked for a tariff resolution. And you can throw in some good, we like Canada as well, but he wanted a tariff resolution, which was specifically with reference to the tariffs that had been imposed as of the beginning of the Trump administration, not those that existed before. And he was very clear, it was only the tariffs with Canada. We had this conversation, not tariffs with any other country,
Right, I
including
appreciate
Mexico.
Okay.
And based upon that, I worked on this and I gave it to Representative
Right.
Page, and with a few
And
minor,
that's where we end up with
well,
the
not
resolution
exactly.
that
And
has been
then
sent to us.
basically, and with a few minor tweaks.
But it
he
didn't
said-
pass the House.
No, then it went over to the House. It was introduced with about 20 sponsors, and House Commerce decided not to take it up at all, period.
Oh, they didn't.
They did. You have to speak to Representative Marcotte. I just know they decided not to take it up. And that's where it stood. And then a few days later, Ashley from the Senator DeRoof's office approached me And she said the Senate would like to do a Senate only, whether Representative Page spoke to the Senate. I have no idea. All I know is Ashley told me to start working on a Senate version. So I turned it into a Senate version and we took out some clauses and we made some minor various tweaks to it. And then Ashley and Senator Baruch said that's what we're going to go with. And I said, fine. And Senator Baruch introduced it. It must now be about 5 weeks ago, 6 weeks ago.
Right, and then it was sent.
And that's the history.
Right.
To this moment.
Thank you. Tim, do you, and the administration is interested in having a resolution of some variety of the post-January response?
I am not aware of the administration needing a resolution. I mean, my own opinion, I think I brought up last week, was the fact that there's a current agreement that we're in the United States, Mexico, Canada agreement.
Right.
And that might be something to state, like there is.
That we
You maintain
support
that.
the current agreement, right?
Correct.
Okay, got it. That, which is what we heard, Tom.
Might we be more safe in focusing on, I love the new resolved, basically changing this to have, to urge the US Congress to take an active legislative role in authorizing all new international tariffs. And maybe leave President Trump out of this, and would that address the concerns about the discriminating between valid and useful tariffs?
It might. So your feeling is that we're imposing that,
I think that having dealt with a lot of resolutions when we're trying to insert ourselves in international affairs, and generally having an extremely cautious approach to those from the time I got here in 2009, and Senator Sears wanted us to talk about Greek Orthodox Church relations because of a constituent. My training has been tread extremely carefully on international affairs, and if we took this to the floor and we did not know what we were talking about in every single line, then this would be embarrassing.
Agreed. On the other hand,
And I
think
don't know that we had time to do this.
and Randy, you had a thought, sorry.
Well, the thought I had was, we do have an issue with Canada and the US that does affect Vermont directly because of the trading partnership. And the notion of doing a resolution, I'm fine with, so long as the resolution is relatively short and simple.
Yeah.
Does not go into the kind of detail that we're going into here, because that's where I think we're getting into waters that are too deep for our knowledge level. What we want to do, what's the object of the resolution?
So I think
The object of the
that's a
resolution
good question.
is to reinforce the fact that we have a close trading relationship with Quebec, and to send the message to Quebec that we support maintaining that relationship that's beneficial for both parties.
I
And
think
it's important to us.
all of Canada
And then
too.
stop talking.
Well, no, and I would go to Tim's support, which is, and that we support the current trade agreement that we already have, the US, Canada, Mexico.
Well, I'd
Trade.
say I wouldn't go that far. I would say we support the relationship that we have at present, and we look forward to continuing or worse that. But I don't want to get deep into the political discussion about the value or lack of value of tariffs for the changes that are being made. I think that's beyond the scope. What we want to do is reinforce what we are and that we'd like to keep it. And we'd like to maintain the close relationship we have because it's valuable to us, period.
I would build on that. I think that's good. And that is I would definitely simplify this and rein it in a lot. But I would support where our current trade agreement, and I would go to Thomas's suggestion, which is to urge Congress to reinstate their muscle.
Legislative authority.
Yeah, their legislative authority in overseeing.
I lost myself.
But I also think, given the impact on business, on Canadian and from American and Vermont businesses, that we might consider asking to have the additional tariffs repealed, because they are injurious to our entire economy. And I think for us to not address that at all, we certainly have heard and can appreciate the harms that, if they are instated, will be real and lasting. are injurious to the very relationship you're discussing. So, I would,
Unless we're really specific about those injuries, I don't think that's a statement that we can make as a committee.
I think we heard in our joint hearing how specifically how injurious they are. I mean, we can certainly build on that in a very short way, but I think we heard and we could craft injury language that would work. But I definitely think we need to, our objective is to reinstate and reinforce our relationship with the importance of our trade partnership and the interdependency that
We
that our
certainly have
manufacturing.
statistics that have been presented to us that we've seen about the lower number of visitors, the
Yeah.
effect on traffic,
Yes,
cross-border
exactly.
traffic in both directions.
And the impact on manufacturing.
Yeah, there's some dollar numbers involved. I mean, there's some stats out there that we could perhaps rely on that's helped, at least very briefly, to say that this situation had resulted in harm to the day-to-day workings of our relationship that is along those lines.
I would think, like, if this is, I just don't know whose time this is most valuably spent.
Right.
If
And
that makes any sense,
think,
because it's,
Yeah.
I'm presenting a housing bill in natural resources on Friday. I'd love for this committee to be able to see that.
Right.
I would not advocate for us spending time wordsmithing this resolution in committee.
I am happy to have those of us who would like to work on it come back to the committee with some significantly
Some
edited
short language.
some workable language that we can look at. And I think that a few of us who would like to do that could work with.
Yeah, I think it's an important message, I think, to our Canadian neighbors on the one hand. It's also an important message for Vermonters who are calling on us
Right.
to quote, do something, unquote.
But, I mean, I'm also speaking as someone whose mother-in-law grew up in the Northeast Kingdom and did not speak English until high school. Starting it out by saying Quebecers feels to me like you've already
But the
ruined
reason
the
I,
point of
you
the
know, the
resolution
point
of
though
this.
is that Quebec is more than just the Quebecois.
That's
Okay.
correct.
Sure, but that you do not have to be that specific and say that. I don't think that's a good idea. I honestly wouldn't vote for the resolution just based on that, because
Right,
I
the people
think that's a
of
bad
Quebec.
idea.
Yeah.
Exactly.
We can say the people. of
I don't know why
Quebec
we're
are-
arguing about it. It's just
We're
not a good idea.
And you know what? We're going forward. And those of us who are interested in maybe working on this a little bit more, Randy, Tom, and I, with Tim and Michael, might well do that and come back to the committee with another resolution. Thank you. So with that, we will do that. And let's shift to the Taiwan resolution, which has also been sent to us.
We got any Chinese?
Yeah.
Do that.
So,
Have we done something like this before?
Yeah.
we do it every year. We have done this resolution every year,
Yes.
as far as I know. And
I've
this,
written about 10 of them now.
right. And, I think we can all read this and.
What happens is each January or so, early February, the Taiwanese Economic Office in Boston sends me a text. And it used to send me a text that ran about 8 pages. And I started having conversations with the folks in Boston saying, hey, this is really too long. I'm going to start shortening it to about 2.5 pages at most. And the office in Boston has been getting better in sending me shorter language over the years. It has not, leaving this year aside, it's never dealt with tariffs. It has always dealt with the existing relationships, both formally and informally, between Taiwan and Vermont. The most recent numbers, which I usually check with Tim, Taiwanese send me numbers, and I run them usually by Tim's office as well. I did this year. And then there are usually a few clauses. Taiwan wants to belong to this international organization or that international organization. And I'll leave a few of those in there. The background on that, of course, is that since the UN officially recognized mainland China as China in 1971, Taiwan was ejected from all the various, such as international aviation, etc. environmental health organizations. And this is Taiwan's desire to be back in those, or at least have a seat at the table. And that's been the substance of this resolution for the last 2 years.
Right, and this resolution, Jane carried the water while she was here for as long as I remember. And so we have taken that forward, Thomas.
And, and this has been a separate, to be quite honest, without mentioning names, this has been a separate Senate and House for the last number of years now, because a member of the Senate who's no longer here vehemently objected to this. I'm not mentioning any names. And as a consequence, it went through, but it went through as a separate house. The decision was made after that to run in this separate House and
Right.
Senate, that if the Senate didn't adopt it, the House would.
So
That's the history of it.
and the House has already had it read out loud. The
Yeah.
Taiwanese delegation was here from Boston.
No, in late March.
And then ours was sent to the committee. But we have read it out loud actually every year that the Taiwanese delegation has come in the Senate, and they are coming again on the 30th. So their hope is that we would be having it ready and pass it out of committee and have it ready. Thomas, what's
So prior to coming into the meeting this morning, I fully supported this. Senator Ron Dinsdale's comments on this past tells me this is treading into an international incident with the recognition of Taiwan and China. So again, I support doing it, but if we're going to do this, I feel like this is not as scary to me. And I wouldn't know everything on this if we brought this to the floor. So I think I heard you say something like we would look silly if we brought this forward and didn't know about every aspect of tariffs. I don't know everything about the United Nations resolution 758 of 1970.
I think it's worth knowing.
Okay.
I mean, I would say, I would, if you want to educate yourself, if I don't know if you've all heard from the
I guess the point I'm making is
group.
this makes me feel more comfortable with doing this. And this does, I would echo Senator Brock's points. This is important to Canada resolutions.
Bruce? I think very important.
I will.
Right.
I think we should be don't get me wrong. I think we should be careful about every resolution we pass, particularly on international relations. I think this has been worded very carefully over the years.
It went through the Senate Committee on International Relations.
Right. And
Governments?
Oh, we don't?
in case
We used to use.
in case folks don't know this,
Okay.
Taiwan was actually left entirely off the list for retaliatory tariffs in this latest round of tariffs, is my understanding.
That's
Yes,
So
but they
I mean-
change by the hour, by the way.
they do change by the hour, but I think it is important to be educated on any of these resolutions that we're doing, and I wouldn't leave this one out. I personally feel comfortable with the
What
language here.
I will say is, again, the history of this, these two are different in one very important respect. Nobody from Quebec or from Canada came looking for Vermont to do this.
Mhm.
Vermont's doing it on its own. The Taiwanese have, with all due respect.
Yeah.
The Taiwanese have a very active effort, I believe, going to all 50 states,
Mhm.
looking for every state to do a resolution every year.
Right. And
And I
this
leave you at that.
generally pertains to democracy.
That,
And I think that's a really important point. We're not talking about Canada's democracy and
It's really focused on recognizing them as a nation as opposed to the position that they're in right now.
Right.
correct.
Exactly.
Although it
That would
really-
be poking a
it
large
doesn't-
bear.
you note it doesn't ask that. It specifically asks, we want a seat at the table in an international organization.
Exactly.
We want, but in nowhere does it say, United States change your policy from 1971,
Right.
recognize us and don't. They did.
Exactly.
It does not say that.
You just inspired me to ask if Tim maybe would want to run some of this potential resolution through your counterpart up in Quebec to get their ideas on how to thread the needle, but fair enough.
I think we're on the spec resolution. I think there's general, as we were talking about, without all the specifics in it, that makes it a lot clearer. In fact, we really simply want to continue and maintain the relationship that we've had has been very positive and beneficial to both parties, and then
Right.
stop talking.
Sure.
Right.
Yes.
I think you just stated the facts of what the trade numbers are, right? That's,
Mhm.
So we'll convene that conversation, but we agreed to do that
Offline.
so I would entertain a motion to move the Taiwanese resolution. I believe given it's been sent to us as a bill, think we said that, you know, we have to vote it out as a bill.
Okay, if you decide you want to move forward with it.
Right, exactly. So I would first ask, are we willing to move forward? I'm very willing to move forward on this. I think that this is an important one for us to underscore and support. So I would entertain a motion for us to move it out of committee and have it presented on the floor.
So moved.
Thank you. And so we have a motion on the table, and I would ask the clerk to call the roll.
Sure. Senator Brock,
Yes.
Senator Chipman,
Yes.
Senator Long Hinsdale.
Yes.
Senator Weeks, yes. Senator Clarkson.
Yes. Thank you, committee. And David, as the most recent person to go to Taiwan, would you be interested in presenting this on the floor? And we can have the secretary read it. Or one of them.
Madam Chair, just want to make one procedural comment. Is that we want to coordinate with the secretary in terms of what day this is introduced.
Yeah.
We'll
do that, because we will aim to do that on the 30th. That, David.
And then I want to hear from you or Senator Chin at some point in the next few days about getting together.
So I think that, Tim, maybe we could, meet at some point tomorrow, if we can figure that out. Sure. So let's go offline. Thank you, everybody.